Okay, I call the meeting to order. Nicole, do you mind doing the roll call? Yes,
Sure. Bernard,
yes.
Benka,
Here.
Ruth Ellen Fitch,
Not here.
Jeff Rudolph,
Not here.
Janet is Gelbart,
Here.
Sadaf Cosme,
Here.
Sergio Modigliani,
Here.
Mariah Nobrega,
Here.
John Doggett,
Here.
John Van Scoyac,
Here.
Jesse Hefter,
Here.
Cliff Brown.
Here.
Did you make the gallery bigger?
Thank you, Trish.
What would you ask?
Just that we have the gallery view instead of the speaker.
Which one? This one?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start off with the minutes for October 6th, 2025. Any corrections to the minutes?
I've got to apologize here. I thought at the agenda for today, at the meeting materials, and I couldn't find those minutes.
They were posted on, well, I find them by going to the town webpage,
Okay.
schedules there, and they're posted there. Now, is there someplace else they should be posted?
I don't see them in the Civic Plus. Is that where you were looking at?
They are there in Civic Plus, under the first is the draft. It's under 2A, it's ERSC 10/6/2025 minutes draft.
Yeah. And I missed it. I apologize.
I don't know when they were posted, but they're there now. I looked before the meeting.
I'm looking, it's blank for me.
Yeah, I a few days ago.
Yeah, I saw him a few days ago.
Oh, there-
It's there. I'm looking on my other
Yes.
screen. I can see it.
Maybe you need to refresh more. I don't know.
Okay, among the people who saw the minutes, and if there's a large enough number, we can vote them. Are there any corrections? Okay, I move approval of the minutes for October 6th, 2025. Nicole? Okay.
It's November 6th.
Okay,
Point
well,
of order, if I may.
sure.
If in fact a number of people haven't read the minutes and there are subsequent edits to be proposed, do you still wish to go forward with a vote at this time?
Yes, I'd like to go
Yeah,
forward.
I may well be in the minority here, Sergio. Why don't we just go ahead with the vote and I'll abstain?
Yeah, and people can correct them after the fact. So I don't think that's an issue if people, read them and see that their name's spelled wrong or something.
Thank you.
Okay, Nicole, call the roll.
Bernard Green,
Yeah, yes.
Dick Benka,
Abstain.
Ruth Ellen Fitch, not here, Jeff Rudolph, not here, Janet Gelbart,
Yes.
Sadaf Cosme,
Yes.
Sergio Modigliani,
Abstain.
Mariah Nobrega,
Abstain.
John Doggett,
Abstain.
John Van Scoyac,
Yes.
Jesse Hefter,
It shows me as absent from that meeting. I mean, I read them, they're fine, I would approve, but if Bernard can tell me whether I can approve minutes for a meeting I was absent to, but I agree with the minutes, I read through them.
Oh, no, you shouldn't approve minutes that you didn't.
Well,
Bernard,
yeah, so
Excuse me for interrupting, but it's been pointed out to me recently that our handbook actually says that people can vote even if they weren't at the meeting, as long as they have read the minutes and are, confident that the minutes are correct.
Well, that's interesting. They may have read the minutes and determined they're correct, but not based on having been at the meeting where the minutes.
We're gonna have to change the handbook. Because
You found another change.
one of the committees I serve on has pointed that out and has actually taken votes where people are approving the minutes even though they weren't at the meeting.
And people can watch the meeting.
Yeah, it's watch recording.
Well, that's different. I mean, if you've watched the meeting, that's another thing. Have you watched the meeting? Who raised this?
Just,
Jesse?
I believe, I mean, when I read the minutes, I thought I was at the meeting because I remember listening to the introduction of the students from Harvard Kennedy School. So it says I wasn't there, but I can abstain. Let's move on.
Cliff Brown,
Abstain.
alrighty.
Okay, let's move on. Updates from the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee subcommittees on topics, timeline, and progress. How do you want to proceed here? Why don't we start off with the town committee?
Sure. Do you have any particular format? Or you just want to hear an update?
Yeah, just give us an update, what you've done,
Okay.
whether you'll be, or what you'll be ready to present by December 1st, and any ideas you have in terms of the structure of the report.
We've been meeting each Thursday, 9 a.m. Thank you for Nicole for your support in getting our meetings to happen and recording them. The major big things we're looking at in the committee include staffing and pay level on the town side in terms of maintaining level of service and community expectations for that. We're looking at other opportunities together with Chaz and his team at opportunities to improve efficiency in the town, while realizing that the staff that we currently have are working very hard and more time than perhaps than they're paid for, but there may be still a possibility, at least override or not, with staff reductions. And the question there would be how we've discussed through our meetings as well, various revenue opportunities in terms of property taxes, fees, and others. In the fee area we discussed this morning, potentially there are discussions going on with transportation in terms of parking, not only on the enforcement side, but on certain types of parking fees for overnight parking, illegal parking in illegal spaces, things like that. And there is a possibility of bringing in more than $500,000 in enforcement alone, not even talking about parking meter changes. Although there is work going on in getting the mobile parking app upgraded and working as well. And the other area of fees, which I noted down in our discussion, has to do with building permit fee changes as well, which could bring in a little over $100,000 of additional revenue. We've discussed, other than personnel side, reducing expenditures. Chaz has been working with each of the departments in discussing where those reductions could take place. We've had a very involved presentation from an excellent set of presentations from Charlie Young on the fire department study in terms of overtime, what the causes are, what the budget needs to look like. And one of the things we've been discussing has to do with maybe putting that overtime, if it's going to be continuing, as we believe it will be, in the department budgets, and let the fire department, Chief Sullivan and other departments perhaps manage the funds there to improve transparency. We've done a little bit of discussion actually this morning at our meeting about discretionary spending. Some of the things that came up had to do with transportation initiatives in terms of I don't know, leaner and meaner kind of approaches to that. We had a discussion this morning as well about what it costs to run Brookline Day, even with commercial support, and even with the marathon fee donation that's given to us. There may be a possibility actually that we're still paying on top of that for that, and it'd be interesting to know, where all these other costs or expenditures are coming from. In some of our previous meetings, although we will be talking about this next week, we've also discussed the kinds of services that are requested by the community, like sustainability, tree preservation, transportation for seniors with the ARPA grant ending next year. I think it was in Brookline News recently as well. There are potentially significant service cuts that have to be looked at, and how are we going to maintain that without additional funding? They're either not currently funded or will not be fully funded. Another discussion we had with town meeting looming next week was when initiatives in town meeting act the budget dollars to support the actual warrant articles. And there are programs that could be added. I think tree preservation is one where the budget has to be increased to provide a means to pay for them, but yet often some of these ideas come through town meeting as ideas without really a full budget to support them. Another discussion item came in this morning as well. Having to one of the questions that came up, we got the data from Chaz this morning, had to do with what we're paying for consulting contracts in the town. Last year I had sent this message to Chaz about a week ago, and it's about 1.2 million. The data set that we discussed is actually going to be posted to our town subcommittee agenda packet, so it'll be available to the rest of the larger committee, I guess today or something. If someone needs it like immediately after the meeting, send me a message, I'll send it to you. It looks like for FY26, it's come down about $60,000. So it's still in the $1.2 million range. And it's a great, I only had a chance to look at it a day ago or so, a couple of days ago when he sent it to me. So it's interesting to look through because you actually see line by line, it's about 50 lines long of where these consulting contracts are being done. And some of the questions we've asked have related to grants that bring in work. And then when the grants end, how do we pay for it? The fact that we have many professionals in our town staff, and yet we still have these grants bringing in consultants. And then finally, there was a discussion this morning about, I think John Van Scoyac brought it up. I think he may still be driving, but just to get it on the table, the question came up about what if we're in an override cycle that's every 3 years, might it make sense to consider at a committee level, oh, there he is, perhaps skipping a year and doing the necessary financial and service level adjustments that need to be done in the absence of the funding that we're asking for, so that we'd experience not the pain of it, but really the reality of it, and make the relevant changes that would be required in the absence of an override. It's also similar to what would happen if the override doesn't pass, of course, and that would, in a sense, put us in a situation where we're actually reacting to the fact that there's less money to do all the things that we'd want to do. So we're meeting next week again, Thursday at 9 a.m. And that's sort of where we are right now, Bernard.
Great, thank you. One question I have regarding consultants, are you giving some analysis of why in some situations we would use consultants, and maybe the impact on revenues that some consultants may have?
Yeah, I don't believe that's in the spreadsheet that Chaz shared with us, but that's a great point. I mean, there may be things that they're doing, like if it's Munis training or something, and out of that we do better. Else that for sure that would be helpful, but we'll have to have, we didn't have, it just came recently and went to our team this morning after our meeting, so it's something we're gonna discuss next week.
Yeah.
Thank you for that point, though. Yeah.
I ran into a consultant contract that has brought in significant amounts of money for a relatively small cost. So I mean, some consultant contracts are entered into because we don't have the staff, or for other reasons. But sometimes it makes a lot of sense to use outside consultants to find information that can be very valuable. So.
Yeah, it's a criticism that I hear a lot, that all of this money is going to consultants instead of, and I think it would be helpful, and it sort of goes with the stuff that I sent to the committee before, to try to explain and go through so that people understand, the voters understand where it comes from. It's not a misuse of funds. It's not being flagrant and willy-nilly with funds, but there are purposes. And so I think part of what we put out there are the things we're hearing as we go through this process of, well, you know, why are you doing that? Why don't we do that? Just get some real data behind it.
The other thing, Bernard, I just wanted to point out is that one of the questions we've asked is what would happen if the override didn't pass, or I believe that's the way Chaz framed it with us as well. What would the risks be? And some of them that we've identified already, these are kinds of things that could be in the narrative when we write things up, would be a longer wait time for building inspections, rodent control activities, programming at the Department of Public Health would slow down significantly. There would be no more farmers market. Language access program that's mandated would be reduced. Timing of responses within the finance department to requests in all different ways would be reduced. And the assessor's office had over the last year or two been able to make great strides in bringing in more revenue through reassessments and analysis, and that would be reduced. The strength they would have to do that would be affected. So those are some of the, you know, we're looking as we're narrowing ourselves down to what exact topics we're going to be discussing in the narrative to what would the risks be to the community as well.
Could I just add to that list? I realized as after having that discussion this morning, there are a couple more that I think may have just been very obvious to me, having numbers for a while, but just need to be said. One of which is we are 6 police officers down currently. If there's no override, those would be cut permanently. There's no way to fund them. So we would lose 6 police officer positions. The other, so we would lose that capacity. And then the other big thing we would lose is the tree canopy, the tree bylaw. Realistically, the only way to fund that, and we're seeing this now that it's been in place for a number of months and we've been able to enforce it, we are not seeing the kinds of revenue necessary to sustain the program, which is what we say. And so we would most likely submit a warrant article to curtail that program, simply because we can't. We wouldn't be able to fund anything absent of additional funding.
Okay, other comments? But by the way, what about the impact on fire? Because I know everyone's concerned about that.
We talked about that too in the employment context. We said that most likely we would see cuts to non-line firefighter services, like in the fire prevention office and in the inspections for short-term rentals. So we would see
That's significant, by the way.
Yeah, administrative service that has been the subject of a lot of community discussion. People want increased enforcement on short-term rentals, but realistically, people have also said want to see cuts to the number of firefighters, and so it's something has to give, and that's what we give in that circumstance.
Okay. Anything else, Jesse?
No, unless some member of the subcommittee wants to add something, I'm good.
May I just add, as you do this sort of analysis, I think it would be helpful to see the assumptions that are built into the analysis about what costs would be increasing, what what assumptions in non-salary expenses are built in, what assumptions in salary increases are built in. In order to say that you would, for example, be losing 6 police officers.
Sure.
The underlying analysis would be helpful to see.
Yeah, we have that. We can definitely do that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and I guess the one other thing I'll point out, Bernard, is that a couple of weeks ago we noticed that on the ERSC homepage, the data files run out. They stop like in last July, and so we've asked, and I guess Chaz and his team has been working on it, but it still hasn't happened. We've asked that the minutes and the associated files associated with the minutes of each of the 3 subcommittees be posted as soon as possible to the sort of the lower section of that page, so that the members of the different subcommittees can see what the other subcommittees have discussed and what kind of information that they've gotten. Right now, it's pretty much hunting around in the brooklinema.gov calendar to see when the meeting was, to click it, to hope to see if the minutes were there. You know, it's not organized. And so Ches committed this morning in our meeting to have an update by next Thursday. I know town meeting's in the middle of it too, so I'm not sure how far they'll get, but we're going to continue to ask for that because I think it would help all three subcommittees out to be able to see the data sets that we're looking at and the minutes so that we can read through what the other committees have been doing.
And I'll do you one better, Jesse, sooner than that. Nicole and Charlie shared with me a draft of what they've been working on, what Nicole's been working on here. So thank you, Nicole, for doing that work on that.
Thanks. Thank you.
So yeah, we should get that to you sooner rather than later.
That would be great. I think all the subcommittees would, all the folks on the bigger committee would appreciate that.
Excuse me. Okay, next, why don't we go to the school subcommittee?
Sure. So the school subcommittee has been doing work on a bunch of different areas. There's also been some areas where we've made less progress on, and there's a topic next, I believe, to discuss timeline overall and sort of viability of the original timeline. So I'll put a pin in that, but did want to just raise that for some visibility. Dick has done some research on healthcare premiums, steps and lanes, and COLA, as well as METCO and materials fees. So a lot of really good research and analysis on those. So that's made some progress, which is great. Jeff is working on an analysis related to BEEP, specifically digging into the migration from a half day to full day program. Was kind of one of the core focuses of that work. He's going to be presenting that next week at our subcommittee meeting on Monday. There are a few other areas that have made perhaps slower progress. The group is looking into evaluation of teaching loads and what the standards are in comparable districts. Analysis of class sizes and classroom usage is in flight, as well as discussing methodology around enrollment forecasting, which I know was shared at the school committee meeting 2 weeks ago. So that did make some progress, taking a look at overall efficiencies. And one of the things that I'm working with Dr. Schmuckler on will be out of district placement revenue opportunities, as well as additional rental opportunities with the Office of Administration and Finance. And Mariah is looking at zero-based budgeting. So those are sort of the areas that the group is looking into. That back half list that I mentioned, people have started to do some baseline research, but it hasn't made as much progress as I think we would have hoped during this by this date. So we have talked within the subcommittee about the viability of the timeline that we had discussed more broadly within this broader study committee meeting a couple months ago, which was to have initial recommendations in December. I don't think that that's going to be viable. And again, people should chime in here as well, with a final report being end of January. And so I would like to raise, and I know we'll get to this, what the other options are in terms of timeline or scope, and hear from everyone else in terms of the viability of that timeline.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from the subcommittee? Any comments from other members of the committee? None?
Because they're in wild agreement with what I said.
You didn't say anything that I think anyone can disagree with, but
That's true. Nothing was controversial. That's fair.
timeline is always.
Yeah, Bernard, I was going to say yesterday at our finance and capital subcommittee, we did see a first file of the building utilization by room. So Susan Givens presented that. I think she'll be talking about it tonight or at our next meeting of the school committee. So it's available in the meeting packet. So Sadaf and our committee have access to it.
Great, thank you.
Bernard,
Yes,
it's John. Is it okay if I just ask the members of the school subcommittee a question? Excuse me, I'm just going to pose a question and for them to think about. I don't think that anybody's going to be ready to answer it just yet. But here's the question. The recent enrollment numbers with the projections through, I think it's 2029, look, they present two different scenarios. One of which is that there'll be kind of flat enrollment for that future period of years. And the other is that there'll be an increase of some 400 students for that period of years. So does it make sense to have scenarios for what the differential in cost would be in the out years under the scenario that assumes an increase in enrollment, or a scenario that assumes flat enrollment? And if the scenario assuming flat enrollment proves true, are there savings to be realized in terms of current space utilization that we could start talking about sooner rather than later? That's the question.
So, John, this is one of the topics that Cliff is leading, specifically around space utilization and enrollment, the forecasting methodology, and then sort of how reliable we think that forecast is, and then tying that back to space utilization. So, Cliff, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this, but this work is, I think, in its early stages. As Jesse just pointed out, that building utilization information was just shared publicly yesterday during that finance subcommittee meeting. And so I believe, Cliff, I don't want to speak to you, but that Cliff is awaiting additional information before he can do work.
Thanks, Dot. Well, John, I think that to the extent that there's an enrollment forecast that is believed to be better than another, I would expect the schools to be using that particular forecast in whatever it is that they put forward. And in that context, I would expect that they're going to be providing their own view as to what their needs would be if that forecast were to pan out. I don't think it's useful for the subcommittee to create a forecast independent of what the schools might do. I think evaluating what they show us and discussing it with them once we get it is a different story.
Yeah, and I did not mean to suggest that there should be a third forecast by any means.
No, I wasn't suggesting that there would be a third forecast. I'm suggesting that I don't think the subcommittee is in a position to actually, create a scenario for what utilization is going to be or would be. I think that that's something that the schools would do, and then the subcommittee would evaluate and analyze. So we were not independently creating a forecast, based on something without input from the schools. I just don't think that'd be productive.
Yeah, and my implication, just to be clear, is, if you look at the possibility of planning for a future of 400 additional students versus the possibility of planning for a future of no additional students, under the first scenario, a person could make a case for, well, we can't cut back those positions this year because we're just going to have to hire back those people a year from now when the enrollment increases by 50 students or whatever. Whereas if you choose to go with the scenario of plan enrollment, you can pretty much figure out whether you have any wiggle room in your pupil teacher ratios for a staff that is slightly reduced. So, but you kind of have to choose one or the other in order to, make those decisions.
Yeah, Mariah.
Let me just address, I think that what we need to evaluate are the forecasts for the period that you might consider an override for. I think if you're going to start going out much longer than that, and I don't believe that there's a forecast that's showing an increase of 400 kids in the next 2.5 years. If you're going out more than that, then I think it becomes pretty speculative on either side.
Yeah, Mariah?
So the two forecasts that John was referring to are the forecast that was by the professional demographers, Cropper McKibben, and the other forecast was the NESDEC, which is a New England school. I can't remember what it stands for. It's basically a free enrollment forecast that we get because we are a member of NESDEC. There's, I believe, extensive conversation about the two enrollment methodologies in last year's budget and certainly in last year's budget conversations about the validity of the NESDEC approach over time versus the much more involved Cropper McKibben approach. And one of them that, for those of you who have been around and watching multiple seasons of the Brookline show, we've talked before about cohort survival and its lack of validity for Brookline, given the amount of churn specifically for the kindergarten years and being able to project future students based on that. And so there is much more to be said for the Cropper McKibben methodology than there is for the NESDEC one. And the NESDEC one is the one that shows the dropping. Cropper McKibben, actually, it was very interesting at the enrollment presentation. They only showed for the next couple of years. Cropper McKibben shows a pretty dramatic increase going out a couple of years. They base this on turnover and they actually look at sort of the entire age demographics of the town and the turnover that they project to see based on mortality ratios and other things. But we wouldn't want to just rest on the Cropper McKibben enrollment for the next 10 years. In fact, at last week's meeting, Susan Givens, the assistant superintendent or deputy superintendent for admin and finance herself said we probably want to refresh that in the next year or so. Because it's important to have a good sense of where we're going. So I just wouldn't treat those two projections as having equal weight. And I think that even as you said, as some of them get a little stale, they really get stale and we need to continue to refresh them. And then there's the question that you're talking about is projections compared to overall capacity. I think that we are probably in pretty good shape right now, given what has gone on and where we were pre-COVID. But we could certainly update that information.
I want to echo Mariah's comment about having Cropper McKibben come back every 3 years or so. It's something that advisory has actually suggested because conditions change and the way that they do their forecasting methodology. If there are significant changes in economic conditions, they really do impact their forecasts. And the NESDEC forecast, frankly, when it came out a few years ago, it was pretty much immediately discounted just when you read the way they do things. It's just not, particularly thoughtful. And so I just wouldn't put much stock in that one.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, next, let's go to the future subcommittee. So in my view, the purpose of the future subcommittee is not to say that this is going to provide, we're going to figure out a way of providing significant revenues or other changes immediately that would be relevant to the May 26th ballot if we put an override there. But that just give voters a sense that we are doing something about the long-term viability of our financial situation. These are things that are not necessarily going to have an immediate impact, but that will give voters a sense that we're not just sitting here letting things happen to us, but that we're moving to look at what are our long-term needs and long-term potential to increase revenues and cut costs. So, Sergio, if you just add that perspective, please state.
Well, first of all, I do have a different perspective, which is that I'm hoping that the future subcommittee work is not simply focused on the voters, but is also focused on the operations within town hall and within the public schools of Brookline.
Yes, of course.
So if it also is beneficial to the voters, great. Now, I wonder, Nicole, could you screen share the report that I submitted? Because I think that's just the easiest way to walk people through it. Is that possible?
The future status report?
Yeah, it came in this morning.
Yep, I can do that.
And by the way, I assume other subcommittees are going to present a summary of their report, a written summary. If not, fine, but I think it'd be helpful to all of us.
Dead silence, Bernard.
No, yeah, not for today. I mean, I think we can
Oh,
share.
no, not
well-
today, but at some point.
Of
Sure.
course, at some
Of
point.
course.
Definitively at some point.
I mean, I assume the minutes will reflect to a significant degree what your report, but to the extent they don't, please help us.
So basically, the document, which is posted now for everyone, but we can briefly go through it, was an effort to look at the tasks that the future subcommittee had identified, of which there were 8 initiatives, and to provide a status report in regard to the timeline and schedule that we had initially been provided with. So we have from Bernard a memo that looks pretty well along for the development and revenue enhancement ideas. A new version of that was just put up. I haven't read it yet, but should be able to share that on Monday with the rest of the Futures Committee. The discussion about inflation, I think, is in the form of a memo, which is being drafted and should be able to be presented to the committee shortly, and I think could be included. The town solar initiative, which was really directed at the expenditures side of our assignment, which was to ask, could we reduce expenditures in some way? And the solar initiative seems to offer that opportunity of reducing the amount of electricity that we might need to buy. And we will have a presentation of that on the 17th, and subject to the full future subcommittee's review of that, could be incorporated into a full report. The next items, if you can scroll up, are parts in the futures subcommittee, but they're all related to the public schools. And they're in the futures partly because the timeline of some of these appeared to probably exceed the timeline of a potential override period of, let's say, 3 years. And all of those initiatives are currently, I think, not possible to provide any significant information for the report in the timeline that we have. You've heard about some of these already from both the town and the schools subcommittees, but primarily schools. And I don't know that I need to go through them in any great detail. But the bottom line here, the scorecard, if I can use that term, if you could scroll up just a whisker, it was that out of these 8, 5 did not appear to me to be possible to the committee. subcommittee did not appear possible. One was a maybe, which was the solar, and the other two looked promising. I'm happy to talk about any of these in any greater detail, but I think that would be the nature of my report.
Okay, any discussion? Nicole, could you put the members back on the board so I can see if anyone has a hand raised?
All right.
Okay, Mariah, is that saying that you have your hand? Oh, yeah, you have your hand raised. I'm
Both my
sorry.
physical and my virtual hand, yeah. My question is, this is a committee process question, so, and this goes to the futures, like, this is a question of what is each committee doing? So if, for example, something is on the schools subcommittee, but it's not relevant to this like particular override, the ideas wouldn't be baked, but it would be for a future, should it be moving over to the futures subcommittee? Because I see some overlap between like, I don't have the document in front of me anymore, but the revenues idea, I think was your second area. And some of the revenues ideas, some of them might be near term, but many of them might be very long term. So where, I guess I'm trying to understand what things are supposed to get, like there's overlap. Where does that overlap go? Do we have a rule about this? How is this going?
There's no rule, but, I think, Sadaf and I are both on both of those subcommittees. And so I would hope that we'd be able to bridge and have sort of like people from both work on some of those issues together. It's like the emails I've been going back and forth with Val on today, because some of what she's done, dovetails with some of the things that we're doing in schools. Because
So you're serving the coordinating function between the two.
I wouldn't be quite that formal, but I think between the two of us, Scott and I, that's our intention, is to make sure that things that do overlap get covered, if you will, get input from both sides. To the
Well,
extent
time is short and the work is a lot, so it just feels like important for no one to be double doing work, I guess.
well, that's sort of the point.
Let me just speak to one example, Mariah, that certainly I've become aware of. There was an early discussion about the whole question of the educational model for the public schools. And it sort of got focused around, should the K-8 be something else? I think now that problem has been clarified so that the true discussion about an alternative model probably belongs on the future side, because its timeline is outside of this immediate period. And so the public schools of Brookline are working on the issue of educational equity for the middle schoolers. And until that matter gets clarified and resolved by the educators, I don't think there's a chance to talk about the model. But incorporating some thoughts about why a different model is something worth looking at might belong within the futures group. I don't know what your thought is, but that would be my one example, if you will.
That example makes sense to me. I'm just going back to, I found out why I couldn't see the minutes. It's because I was looking at I was looking at the wrong ERSC committee meeting from today. So when I looked at the right one, I had the right agenda, and just pulling up the document that you provided. It's just more of this question of the, I guess, revenues is one example of them. But if there's other things that are happening in the schools that clearly are going to be well outside of the 3-year range, Cliff, you're saying you want it to stay in schools and just be sort of, you're on mute if you're responding.
Can I?
No, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm thinking of something a little bit different than what you are. I think to the extent that something is outside the 3-year time frame that we're looking at, yes, sure, it goes in futures, at least the detail of it does. I'm looking at some of the information that is being supplied, which is going to be helpful and utilized by both subcommittees. And so to the extent that there are questions that might come up about that information, clarification, instead of people asking the same questions of both subcommittee, trying to have just one person ask those questions.
Okay.
And just to clarify, there isn't duplicate work because those things we are largely have in the futures list have my name on them because I'm chairing the schools subcommittee. So some of those things will be outside of that 3-year time horizon, but the work will not be duplicated.
And let me add that since you mentioned revenues, there are revenue issues, for example, increases in fees, I think, that are appropriately short-term and should be in the school's budget. Whereas there are also revenue issues that are way off in the future that should be in the futures subcommittee. There's no real conflict there. It's just, we're talking about different things, long-term and short-term.
And perhaps the example that you just mentioned, the only revenue initiative that I think is currently in the future side is the memorandum that Bernard has prepared concerning possibilities around development and additional revenue, or promoting ways of getting more businesses and activity in the town. And that probably is a multi-year, sort of longer term kind of an item. I'm not aware of any other revenue enhancement that we currently have, except within the various school categories where there clearly might be opportunity. But I've indicated that we don't believe we can go forward on the futures part of that until some basic information has been organized and put together.
There is one item in my memo that maybe should be addressed by the town subcommittee. Actually, two. First of all, permit fees, which I think they are taking up, and secondly, the assessor's office has hired a consultant, ad consultant, to help identify personal property that businesses have that are not reporting or acquire after the reporting period ends. And that's a short-term revenue source or revenue increase that we're currently using. So that's probably something that should be mentioned as a good way of increasing our revenues in that area by the town.
But I do concur that the basic question that I think that we're discussing right here, that Mariah has raised, I think correctly, let's avoid duplication in anything we can do. And I think we're relying on the 3 subcommittee chairs to help with that information flow as best we can. But certainly I am very much open to being guided by how others view this, and thinking to a point that Bernard made at the beginning of our meeting today, which is what is the nature of the report that we're actually thinking about, and how do we deal with that, given that I think all of us felt pretty strongly that we wanted to be able to analyze information, something that Cliff, I think, reminded us of earlier, and Sadaf as well. And that takes time. And then to put our names on some conclusions, I think becomes a challenge if we're really going to try to put a report out. And I think most of us have come to the conclusion that we need to modify something here. We need to modify the timeline that we've been given, or we need to ask ourselves whether we're really performing any useful function at all. And maybe we should just hang up our hats and go about our merry way.
I hear a statement on that.
Could I add on to that, Bernard? Is that okay a little bit?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the hanging up the hats bit, but I do think that as we're thinking about what the final work product is, it's really clear that to be clear, I think it needs to be really clear to the community what we think regarding this vote in May, this presumptive vote in May, and separately longer term issues. And mixing them will only create confusion. So no matter which committee addresses which thing, as long as the three chairs are coordinating, that's great. But I really feel strongly that the report needs to not conflate near-term issues with longer-term issues. The longer-term issues needs to be so that we collectively as a government and a community have our eyes on the ball of what the levers are for long term, but those shouldn't be mixed and in any way implied to the community that those are possible short-term solutions that should impact May. So I just want us to be very clear in that messaging. And it's not to diminish the long term. I think it's probably more important, but I just want that to be the final structure. I would put my vote in for that structure.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that, and we can't confuse voters. Just yet. Jesse?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I asked my other two co-chairs about 2 weeks ago about meeting on a regular basis so that the three committees had some linkage about our activities. We have met, and our first meeting was productive. Our second meeting had to be canceled due to massive scheduling conflicts among the three of us. We're going to try for one next week, but just Bernard, so you know, I am trying to make sure that Sadaf, Sergio, and I are in touch, at least on a weekly basis, outside of our subcommittee meetings, so that we just have an opportunity to share what we're working on, what our challenges are, and where the next best steps might be. So there's like no overlap, or if there is overlap, we know who to put together and to ensure that we're tracking, in the directions we want to go. Just wanted to make sure you knew that was happening.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that really feeds into our next topic, which we're not getting to right now. And that is putting together some structure for our report and outline. So, Janet?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as part of that structure, we need the history. The voters don't necessarily understand how we got where we are. So they need to know that before they can accept or begin to accept possible solutions. The causes are inflation, their staff and salary raises, and then there's all this unfunded stuff. A lot on the town side. I think on the town side, it might be more controllable than on the school side because their mandates come from on high and ours seem to come from the community itself. But that's one of the things that I keep pushing is when I talk to people, there is not a clear idea of what the drivers are, why we're here. And so the responses are cut this, they don't need to do that. And I just want to make sure that we're grounded. And we also talk about, which I've mentioned before, what the school committee has done is doing with regard to the report that came out this year, because that's where a lot of voters are focused. Because at least on the town side, we have said, we need the voters to understand that we're being good stewards of their money.
Thank you. Because I agree with you. John?
Thanks. Thanks to everyone who I think have made some very interesting points. I'll start off by saying, Sergio, I get where you're coming from, but I don't think we need to hang up our hats. I hope that what will come out of this process is both something that is both meaningful to staff in terms of the options that seem reasonable to staff in terms of where there are areas of potential savings, where there are areas of that will perhaps in the long run result in additional revenues. And in that regard, I have from the beginning viewed our work on all three of the subcommittees and the committee as a whole as being a preparation for ultimately hearing a proposal or a set of proposals from the town administration as to you could address the problem this way, A, or you could address the problem this way, B, or that you could address the problem this way, C, or D or E. And in light of work that has been done by the subcommittees and the committee as a whole, to look at all of the underlying issues. What are the immediate challenges on the revenue side? What are the immediate challenges on the expenses side? What are the long-term challenges on revenues? What are the long-term challenges on expenses? In light of the work we did in those areas, we then weigh in what we think the best options are that should be put on the ballot in the form of an override question. And then that goes before the select board as being the result of this process, which began with administration saying, let's set up this process. And at the end of the setting up of the process, this is the conclusions we came to. And then the select board has something to point to as to, whatever decision the select board makes in the form of the ballot question, we'll at least be able to say it was the result of, the expenses and revenues process. And it was a result of how that process, at the end of the day, weighed in on the various ballot options presented by the administrative staff.
Okay, any further discussion there? Let's move on to the final item on the agenda.
Yeah, sorry, Bernard,
Yes.
I did want to talk about this further. So going back to the point that I made when I shared my committee update, I think given the concern about our committee and what Sergio shared as well, a number of different groups being able to, or rather not being able to hit the original timeline that we had discussed, I think we need to talk through what a revised timeline will be. It's not viable, at least within my subcommittee, to have a holistic set of even initial recommendations by December 1st, just given where we are, given capacity constraints, given how things have played out within the broader committee, just from a timeline point of view. So what I'd like to do is put on the table a potential revision of the timeline. The original thinking was an initial proposal for the select board meeting in December with the full report at the end of January. And I don't think that we're going to be able to do that. So if we were to push the full report out, I think Chaz, you can chime in on what you think is reasonable to take to the select board in mid-December, and we should talk about it. But I think realistically putting a full report together by the end of January, it's just not going to be possible given where we are, plus straddling the holidays, which adds a layer of complexity. And I think sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I agree. I have had this discussion now with some members of the committee and with the superintendent. I'm not really sure if Bella is on. But I know that we've talked about this in terms of how things get together. My understanding now is that the school department is still on track to get an initial forecast without some of the that is not yet delving into the proposed efficiencies and potential restructurings out by early December. And that when that comes through, that can form the basis of at least enough, that can give us enough clarity that we can go to the forecast in mid-December in front of the select board and the advisory committee with enough data to forecast, generally with the schools and more specifically with the town. We will have, on the town side, we will by then, I believe, based on the conversations we've been having in the subcommittee, have enough information to be able to lay out the parameters of any potential town, a town override scenario, several potential town override scenarios for the select board to initially take up, depending on the recommendations of the subcommittee, based on some of the things that we're delving deeper into now. and then what would happen in a no override scenario. We would not have obviously a report done by that point, but we would have enough information on the town side to have that substantive discussion. And then I think the broader committee can, in early December, look at some of those town recommendations, do the due diligence necessary, provide feedback. We can also hold the public hearing that I've been wanting to hold to make sure that members of the broader public can speak on the town side of things. And that members of the unions that have been wanting to speak on these subjects can have their opportunity to speak as well in advance of that forecast. So you would have the work on the town side complete in advance of the select board's forecast meeting in mid-December. And then work would commence from there based on the select board's feedback on a potential town side report. From there, you kind of go into shifting this group's focus over to the school side. If on the school side, the efficiencies analysis is done by mid-January, which is where I think, although I do not want to speak for the school department, that's where they are now, in terms of in terms of where their timeline winds up. Given that both town and schools have to publish our books, our finance books, by early February. We're bound by bylaw to do that, or at least I am.
State law.
Well, no, it's just town. The town is more specific about what we can and can't do, but yes, state law ultimately, we have more specific constraints on us that we can impose. So we both will be publishing that material in February. And at that juncture, there should be enough information for the committee to evaluate any proposals, the efficiencies, and any potential override asks that the school committee may want to bring forward. That gives you enough time it's going to be close, but a report, finalize the sections of the report by mid-February, with the understanding that you're going to have some revisions are going to be necessary based on what you hear out of the schools on the town side, just based on how services are shared and so forth. And that then gives you the time necessary to go to the select board, for the select board to receive it, to provide feedback, for the select board to hold a public hearing, and for the select board to ultimately set a ballot question in early March to meet that 60-day deadline. So it's tight. I would recommend that we try to finalize the work of this committee by mid-February, so that the select board can have a 2-week runway to get the material it needs in order to feel confident enough to put a question on the ballot, if it decides to move that way. So working backwards from mid-February, whereas initially we had said, if this work can largely be done, if the recommendations can be made in December, the report can be written in January, then you have February for the select board to act. You're cutting the select board's time basically in half, and giving the committee some extra time to do the reporting out. So that would be my backstop recommendation here.
So I think one of the, oh, go ahead, Cliff, raise your hand.
Thanks for that, Jazz. I want to, John, I got to tell you, I was a little surprised at what you said and the way you said it, because honestly, it's not the way I've been operating, or I think the way anyone's been operating. So was very surprising. I have a question for Jesse, and this relates to what we're going to get from the schools and when we're going to get it, and how information is going to come to this committee. The first analysis that we're going to get from the schools, which maybe, we might get something a little bit tonight, we might get something beginning in December, but it is going to be a bottom line number only. There's not going to be any any information behind those numbers for us to analyze, no detail. That's what we've been told. The schools, the school committee is not going to get a budget proposal, which I believe would be a budget proposal that has their anticipated override request until sometime in January, according to their schedule. This committee will not get that information ahead of the school committee, because anything that gets released to the public must first be vetted and approved by the school committee. So Chaz, I'm not at all sure that the timeline you outlined is going to be achievable to the extent that the select board actually wants people to do analysis of what they get, as opposed to creating a framework before we have information and then trying to apply it to the information that we end up being given.
Okay, Cliff, could you prepare to repeat that when Chaz comes back in the room?
Sure. Maybe we can just roll the tape. Can we just roll the tape back?
So,
But
go ahead. Sorry,
yeah,
I thought you were done.
it was really a question. Yeah, I was asking Jesse a question about process to make sure that what I said and what I've certainly heard on multiple occasions is accurate and should be understood by the people in this room.
And Cliff,
Yeah.
when you say it again,
Yes, please.
for Chaz's benefit. The other issue is the 1 year versus 3 year issue. I didn't understand that what is going to emerge in mid-January would go anywhere beyond 1 year, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
I think the schools are going to have to go more than 1 year if they want more than a 1 year override.
Right, but I understood that they would be presenting a budget sometime in January to the school committee, and I didn't understand that to be a 3 year budget. And maybe Mariah, who I don't see.
Yeah,
She wisely skipped.
So that, but I do raise that issue of the 1 year versus 3 year framework as well.
So perhaps Jesse can clarify this. My understanding was that it was bottom line numbers for the 5 years tonight, more detail in the first week of December for 5 years, with the understanding that years 4 and 5 were going to be, understandably more of a gap,
Okay.
right? In which case, and then I think what happens in that January, February timeline is just the sort of solidifying the budget for the next fiscal year. So it's, perhaps at even more granularity. But Jesse is here, and Jesse is part of the school's finance committee as well. So perhaps he can clarify this for us.
Chaz is back, by the way.
I apologize.
Yeah, the only thing,
This isn't on your schedule.
That's fine.
just to answer Cliff's question, I mean, and what Sadaf said, there is no discussion of the 27 and forward budget this evening at the school committee, to my knowledge. Bella just got the guidelines from us, voted last week. She's working on it, and I expect it sometime January. That's probably when it would be. And I think Cliff is right in terms of process, that the school committee, finance and capital will see it first, and then school committee will look at it. But at that time, it's already in the meeting packet, so people would be able to see it as well.
It's in the meeting packet, but correct. But at least historically, from the advisory committee's perspective, we're basically told, you really can't evaluate it and get into the weeds on it until the school committee sort of votes it and approves it. So
yeah, that'll be last year that was May. So
Yeah. But I will say on today's, just to clarify, on today's school committee agenda, item 6 includes fiscal 25 close, fiscal 26 first year budget, PSB 5-year budget projection. So that's in there. It might not have all the details, it might not be solidified, but it is on the agenda. So we will see something tonight at that meeting.
Well, we may be,
Yeah.
except that no information's been shared yet, which is sometimes, I guess, sometimes a problem for us on school committee is that these things are put in the agenda. We have absolutely no chance to look. Hasn't been shared with finance. We met yesterday. So I don't even know what that means, honestly.
Yeah, and Jesse, what I'm referring to is not the final budget, but the preliminary budget
I
that,
understand.
yeah, has to be produced by mid-February.
That's right.
But the school committee generally soft approves it the end of January.
Yeah. And I know that Bella talked about several versions of it as well, Cliff. Because one of the things she talked about with us a month ago or so is how she wants to potentially, there'll be a level service budget, but also she's been pretty firm on wanting to restore services or functions that were reduced last year. So we're not exactly sure which ones those are, but that will present itself as a discussion point as well. I'll just say that.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Cliff.
No, go ahead, please. I've said enough.
Sergio?
I think all of us were asked to participate on this committee, and we're told that we were going to wrap things up in the late summer. Then it became September, and then it became November, and now it sounds like we're off into the springtime. I don't know about the rest of you, but I planned my life around the initial commitment, and I'm out of the country after the first of the year, basically. So my ability to function and to provide anything is going to rapidly ground to a halt past that date. So I just wanted to put that in the hopper, even though it's really a point of personal privilege rather than contributing to the key discussion that's underway here.
Hey, Cliff, could you, thank you, Sergio. Could you not repeat what you said, Chad, about the third?
I've got short-term memory issues anyway, so I probably couldn't repeat it.
Point.
Yeah, so Chaz, while you were out of the room, I didn't realize you were out of the room. I was going through what I understand the school committee and school department's process is going to be in terms of providing information, not just to this committee, but to the community, and pointing out that I think relative to the timeline that you outlined, the ability or the opportunity for this group to get the sort of information that I personally would expect we need in order to be able to do the sort of analysis that people would expect from a group like this is not going to be available until, late January, mid to late, maybe mid-January at the earliest, but really more like late January. And so I'm having a hard time understanding how we can write a report that's going to be going to the select board sometime in January before we even get that information.
And so I don't think, I agree with you that on the school side, we're not going to have report material by January. It's just not possible. My thought was the work of the other two subcommittees on the town side and on the future side would be able to be completed by that point, which would leave capacity from the full committee to address the remaining issues on the school side when they come in. So effectively taking these reports in stages with the understanding, right, that there may need to be cleanup work on the town side of things, depending on where the schools ultimately come out. But I think knowing that we will at least have some frame of reference in December is going to allow the town side to basically close its book and make a recommendation based on what we know and what's out there. And that would allow a report to be written through January and then leave the school's work to be done in February. It's not ideal. I agree with Sergio, and I agree with everyone that it's not ideal. But I also think, to your point, Cliff, that in order for the select board to make an informed decision, there really isn't a choice here. You know, there can't be a blind override question. There has to be some sort of independent analysis and justification for the asks that we are making, if we are to make those asks at all. And so, given the realities of the situation, given the capacity on the school department side, this is where it kind of winds up.
I appreciate that, Chaz. And so I'm just going to provide another point for the group. And this comes from, I don't know how many years now it's been that I've been, chair of the school subcommittee for the advisory committee. And what we do every spring is actually, go through and talk to the schools about their budget. Clearly not doing the level of analysis that I would expect you would want from a group like this. But, I think it's optimistic, the timeline you're proposing in terms of being able to analyze what's going to come from the schools and to have a back and forth dialogue with them when it's the middle of the budget season, things are changing rapidly. You're trying to forecast what enrollment's going to be. They're, trying to figure out, what their staffing needs are going to be. They have RIF notices they have to, prepare by May 1st. It's the town meeting season. I think you're being very optimistic. I'm just going to leave it there.
So I wonder if one of the things, and I know, John, but just you have your hand raised, but just to piggyback on this, and I think Jesse is still here, but we don't have.
I am, but only for about 90 seconds. I have to do a school pickup.
Okay. All right, so it's going to get worse in a second, but I don't think we have the full school representation here to have a conversation about the viability of a revised timeline. And I do think it would be helpful to hear from the people on the school side who will provide and who can clarify for us exactly what information we will get when, and then and get that information from them, so that we can then build a revised timeline or sort of a proposed revised timeline around that, and then discuss whether we think that is or is not viable. Because Chaz, you made a number of assumptions about what would be available. One, I know Val had said in our futures conversation that for the school model work that it wasn't viable to get to that until January or February, just given all of the different pressures that exist currently on the 5th floor staff. And so I just want to make sure that we are accurate in whatever revised timeline we propose, and then we can discuss whether we think that is a reasonable timeline and what can viably get done within that timeline or not. Sorry, John.
Okay, John, very quickly.
Yeah. Cliff's points are well made, and I have no problem at all if he and I disagree on what we think of as being the objectives of this whole process and the timeline for this whole process. But I think it's self-evident at this point that what I laid out is an objective that fits a timeline that runs, to January, and then kind of takes a break until we hear the recommendations by the town administrator. And then, we pick up for 1 or 2 meetings to review the recommendations from the town administrator. And then that gets presented to the select board. that's doable. It's achievable. It's a realistic timeline. And I worry that the scenario that he has described is one in which there's a lot of duplication between the work of the advisory committee, the work of this committee, the work of the school committee, the work of the school finance committee, the work of the town school partnership. I don't think we want to be in a position of simply, doing the work that already existing committees do. I've always thought of this process as being one that sort of is a step removed, looks at the big picture, asks the big picture questions, and defines the big picture challenges, and then weighs in on the recommended array of options for an override question.
Okay, Janet?
So then there's reality, and reality is if there's no override on the ballot, then the town and the schools are going to have difficulty even managing to provide the same level of services. And I'm, thinking back to Dr. Gibbons' report and the amount of money that the schools at that point felt they needed in order to do what they're doing right now. So we don't have the luxury, and I hear what Cliff is saying, and we can't put something on the ballot that says, just give us money. So there has to be something behind it. But at least the folks that I talk to, they're tired and they're not going to keep doing this. So if we put forward a ballot initiative that doesn't say, and we think, we have some runway in front of us, and these are the corrective steps we're taking, it won't pass. So there's no luxury of waiting until April or May, and I know that's been the school's timeline in the past. It's just, it can't happen if something's going to go on the ballot. So we need to be able to make decisions with what we have, and those decisions are going to have to last for a while, because I don't think we can put something on the ballot now and come back next year. I just don't see, at least the people that I talk to, being willing to go along. And that's the ultimate decision maker, not us, not the select board. It's the voters. And we need to either give them something or figure out how we're going to live with 2.5% or whatever increase in revenues are projected for next year.
Okay, I think that, one of the ways that these questions are answered is by actually looking at the outline of our report. What is it in the report that we can put in the report that will be sufficiently complete to be something that the voters, will see as important, and what can't we do, and how do we address that?
And my concern is if the schools don't have the data, and I appreciate it may just not be there, that it isn't going to work to put something out and then it's still not enough. That we could probably say this is what the town needs, but the schools' needs have always been higher. And from where they're starting this year, they're starting from behind. They're not just talking level service, they're talking restoring things. And I'm just questioning the level of reality in that. But I just, people are going to want to know it's over. This is the last one, or at least the last one for a while, and we're not going to keep coming back to the same questions and the same fights.
Sergio?
Just two comments. First is, do we still have a quorum?
How many of
1,
you are
2,
there?
3.
I mean, how are we counting John and Bernard and Cliff
6.
and John Doggett, who are alternate?
For John Doggett, and we don't count John.
Well, John is, well, in either event, you count them as one. If you have, so
I don't think we have a majority at this point. I don't know, but I will, in the spirit of keeping the conversation going, what's the conclusion? We have a quorum?
Yes.
Okay. Which is defined as 5.
Yes.
Yes, and we have 6.
And, okay, I have to leave in 1 minute, just.
Okay, so we briefly touched on an item which I think is at least worth resurfacing here at the end, which is whether there's any validity in considering a 1-year recommendation, which provides some funding to both the schools and the town, and allows sufficient time for a more thorough examination of a longer term override. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
So perhaps, may I suggest, I know next week is town meeting, but to answer the question that I think Cliff raised and that folks are kind of raising now, which is, and Sadaf raised as well, about timeline, that we resume this conversation at some point next week and ensure that representation from the schools is here. Whomever on the school side can talk and true out that timeline so we can have the expectation of how, to Cliff's point, how realistic or optimistic any sort of projection here is. Because to Janet's point, right, we can't, this is different than how we usually do business, and it has to be. We're bound by a stricter timeline than we are in other circumstances. I am mindful of John Van Scoy's concern about not duplicating work, but I also think that even if some of the work product or some of the analysis trends in similar directions, the ultimate aim and the ultimate goal of this committee is different. And so thinking through how that works out. So perhaps the conversation, if we could get a quorum together for next week and ensure that we have representation from staff and the school committee, that might be the best way to proceed.
And I assume that we can get representation from the schools. I mean, if we can't, I mean, how can we give them an override? Or an override as well?
So can I just, I really want to make a couple of short comments to both Janet's comments and John's. I'll start with Janet's. I think it is incorrect to go back to June and assume that what Dr. Givens said in terms of need is actually what the schools might define as their need. And I say that because it presumed no revenue that the schools themselves could generate. It presumed no efficiencies. It presumed no changes. And it was nothing more than pulling what they had started with last February and then adding a little bit to it. It was not a prepared statement. And so I would just suggest that you do not have that in the back of your head as their starting point. John, with regard to duplication of work, I think what you look at from a committee like this, and I could be completely wrong, even though it's like the 3rd or 4th one I've been on, is sort of work and analysis that comes from a different perspective than the school finance committee is itself going to be doing, because they are not looking at things the way the select board does. They're not elected to look at things that way. So these committees have always taken a different approach. In terms of overlapping with TSP, now, no worries there, because TSP doesn't do analysis. Okay. In terms of overlapping with the advisory committee, well, I don't think that's a problem. I'm chair of that subcommittee, and what we do can dovetail perfectly with whatever this committee is doing. It does not end up, or should not end up, being a duplication. I am much more concerned. And if you just want this committee to react to things put in front of it, then you should tell us to go home and come back in January.
Cliff, that's not what I said.
No, but I'm saying that's what you should do. Because
No, but I said we should do analysis of the long range and immediate problems and do analysis of what are the likely scenarios for long range and immediate solutions, and then respond to options for override questions presented to us by the administration. That's all I said.
long-term and intermediate term don't deal with short-term. It doesn't deal with the detail of what it is that the group is thinking about or has been thinking about. That's
Yeah.
my, and so, yeah, sure, maybe there's some stuff on the long term, but I gotta tell you, you don't need everyone to be involved to do that. You don't need these subcommittees to be meeting the way they're meeting to do that. You're really suggesting that we evaluate the proposals when we get them. And that's fine, but it's a different process than what, at least I believe, we've been undertaking and operating under.
Yeah. Well, we can have that difference of opinion. I'm just trying to suggest a path forward that is achievable. That's all.
Okay, so it is 2:35. We still have to talk about outline, and maybe what we should suggest is that someone take that on themselves in terms of developing sort of the structure of our report, which would also identify what we can and cannot include based on the information that's going to be available. And from that standpoint, we can actually decide whether we have enough information for the public to make a recommendation. That makes sense to anyone? No? Okay, anyone have a better idea?
Well, no, it makes sense. I'm worried that whoever says it makes sense is going to be appointed to to do the outline. And to be upfront with everybody, I'm going to be away for the next 2 weeks out of the country. So yeah.
And I would add, Bernard, that to some extent, I think that an outline might depend on what we hear from the schools at our next meeting about what we're going to be getting and when.
No, that's true. I'm thinking, for example, as Janet said, we have to address certain issues like she mentioned inflation, the union contracts, unfunded mandates that are sort of the context within which a lot of these decisions are made. I would add, some explanation of how we get ourselves into part of this situation because of Proposition 25, but 2.5, 2.5, as well as it's critical that we include a discussion of what has been done, and it's been a lot in response to the Clifton Lawson Allen report. I mean, that is sort of out there, and if we don't answer that, we might as well go home. But I think that we can. So there's a lot that we can pull together for our report, and then identify what's left that we need to do in order to make something or create a report that's going to be persuasive. Okay, so
everybody's taking a big step backwards.
Okay. Dick, so once we take the step backwards, what next?
I personally don't see a path forward right now to outline the report, and maybe I'm sharing the pessimism of others at this point in time. So, but
I think in terms of a full report, what we can do is let's try and get the group together for next week. In the interim, though, I think at least on the town and the future side, we can do some preliminary work on the staff side based on conversations that those subcommittees have had about where those lay out. we can use Sergio's report and the list of 5 subtopic areas that we talked about in the town committee to sort of build that out. And then we can complete that. So we won't come with a totally blank slate next week. We'll have the scaffolding of something on, at least on the town futures subcommittees work. And then we can talk about where the schools are and how that plays out. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. What about other people?
Makes sense to me.
Okay,
It does to me. Can I request, since, I'll accept that Cliff, a lot of work has been done, but I don't know what that is. So to the extent that we can hear some of the things that have changed since June, I'm not denying that they've changed, but it's hard to evaluate without knowing what they are. So the thing in my head is we're starting $2 million behind because that's what they borrowed in order to get through this year. So to the extent that that's different, it would be helpful to see that.
okay, and we don't have a quorum, so we might as well end the meeting. Or
We'll stay in one way or the other.
hang up our hats and go home. Just teasing.
Okay,
But just please keep an eye out for Nicole's email about an invite for next week. We want to try and get that on the calendar as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
great.
Okay.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.